Before we begin, take a moment to breathe. If these reflections speak to something silent inside you, subscribe so you don't lose the path back here. Every like, every comment helps this message find those who are still searching in the dark. Now, let's begin. Carl Jung discovered that there comes a moment when everything changes between a narcissist and an empath. The precise instant when the empath begins to understand the narcissist's unspoken language. Not their words, but the invisible grammar that shapes their emotional maneuvers, their strategic silences, and their psychological theater. Jung observed that once this awareness awakens, the balance of power reverses. The narcissist who once dictated the emotional script suddenly realizes the play is over, and control begins to dissolve. Imagine this moment. You've decoded the rhythm of their charm, the weight of their guilt trips, the pattern of their silent withdrawals. You can now predict their manipulations before they even appear. And most importantly, you've stopped reacting in the way they expect. Their hooks fall away, powerless. This is what Jung would call the emergence of shadow literacy, the ability to read darkness without being pulled into it. But he also warned that this stage is dangerous, because when a narcissist senses you can finally see through their illusions, they either escalate dramatically or vanish completely. Jung realized that the narcissist's language was never truly communication. It was psychological warfare disguised as intimacy, a series of emotional codes designed to secure territory inside another person's mind. He called it the will to power hidden beneath the mask of affection. Every conversation, every emotional exchange was never about understanding, but about control. Where love reigns, Jung wrote, there is no will to power, and where the will to power dominates, love is absent. Once you learn to decode their system, something profound happens. Their rage stops feeling personal. Their charm stops feeling magnetic. You begin to see that what you once interpreted as connection was actually manipulation, a mechanical dance designed to preserve dominance. Their silent treatments become visible punishments, their affection temporary rewards, their anger evidence of a crumbling illusion. And as this pattern reveals itself, you experience the first taste of psychological freedom. Jung described this awakening as the birth of individuation, the moment you begin to live free from other people's unconscious projections. But freedom, he warned, is rarely welcomed. When the narcissist senses that their control is slipping, they enter what he called the escalation phase, attempts to reclaim your inner territory at any cost. They become louder, colder, kinder, crueler, anything to keep you within their psychic gravity. Through decades of research, Jung discovered that narcissists communicate through what he termed projection language, words that disguise the truth they cannot face. When they accuse you of being too sensitive, they mean, stop reacting to my manipulation. When they go silent, it means, I am withdrawing approval until you obey. When they suddenly shower you with affection, it means, I need to reset your nervous system so you'll tolerate more abuse. It is never spontaneous. It is strategy. He called this dynamic false chemistry, a simulation of intimacy that produces dependency, not transformation. Once you translate their behavior rather than simply feeling it, you stop believing the story they tell. You begin to understand that every inconsistency is deliberate. Their contradictions are not confusion, they are calibration. Every act of kindness conceals control. Every argument hides an attempt to shape your perception. But Jung's insight went deeper. He warned that recognizing manipulation in others will inevitably confront you with your own shadow, the part of you that needed their approval, that feared their rejection, that mistook intensity for love. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, Jung wrote, but by making the darkness conscious. The darkness, he said, is not only in them, it lives in the patterns within us that allowed their power to exist. When you finally begin to see these patterns clearly, you face what Jung called the recognition crisis. the moment when awareness becomes irreversible. You can't go back to believing their emotions are real when you know they are tactics. You can't pretend the chaos is accidental when you see the architecture behind it. For the narcissist, this is the beginning of collapse. Their system only functions when the other remains unconscious. When you wake up, the illusion dies. But the awakening doesn't come without temptation. Jung observed that those who learn the language of manipulation often flirt with using it. After years of powerlessness, the ability to predict, to influence, to trigger can feel intoxicating. This, he warned, is the dark mirror. You might catch yourself mirroring their silence, withholding affection, using guilt to teach lessons. You might call it boundaries, but Jung would recognize it as shadow possession, the moment when the empath begins to resemble the oppressor. He wrote, "The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong. Learning the narcissist's language can swing you from victim to predator, both bound to the same unconscious field. The challenge is not to master their tactics, but to transcend them, to rise above the entire game of power and reaction. True mastery," Jung said, "is the capacity to hold power without using it destructively. Shadow literacy means reading the manipulation without responding in kind. You no longer need to punish, to outsmart, or to win. You simply choose not to participate. You step out of the system entirely. You stop reacting because you understand that the performance was never about you." This is what Jung called conscious detachment, seeing without absorbing. You develop what I call intuitive immunity, the ability to sense manipulation before it forms, to detect control without needing to analyze it. Your nervous system begins to align with truth, not tension. Awareness replaces vigilance, calm becomes your protection. But as Jung noted, this new awareness turns inward. The true question isn't, why do they manipulate? But why did I stay? What wound made me mistake control for care, chaos for passion, punishment for love? The narcissist, Jung said, becomes an X-ray for the psyche, revealing every fracture of self-worth, every boundary not yet claimed. And once revealed, these wounds can finally heal. Healing begins with authenticity, learning to speak your own emotional language again. Instead of guilt, honesty. Instead of fear, truth. Instead of managing others' moods, managing your own energy. Jung believed that individuation, becoming your true self, demands this reintegration of voice and value. You no longer seek validation through another's chaos. You find meaning in your own clarity. And yet the narcissist does not vanish quietly. When they lose psychological territory, they move through predictable stages: escalation, false awakening, replacement, and revisionism. First, they intensify the manipulation, then feign enlightenment to regain trust, then replace you to preserve their ego, and finally rewrite history to make themselves the victim. Jung described this as the collapse of projection. When the unconscious can no longer sustain its illusions, it must externalize blame. Understanding this protects you from taking their behavior personally. Their fury isn't proof you hurt them. It's proof they can no longer control you. Their replacements aren't proof you were inadequate. They're proof they cannot exist without someone to manipulate. You've become immune to their control, and in that immunity they face themselves for the first time. Jung called this the dark night of the soul, the moment when the persona cracks and the shadow stares back. He warned that this confrontation may drive them to extremes, but it is not your burden to bear. People will do anything, he wrote, to avoid facing their own souls. Your responsibility ends where their awareness begins. This is the paradox of freedom. The less you analyze them, the more you heal yourself. You no longer need to understand their every move, because understanding has already served its purpose. The goal is not comprehension, it is transcendence. Jung called this the freedom paradox, immunity achieved through indifference. You don't fight their language anymore because you no longer speak it. Freedom, however, feels strange at first. After years of emotional turbulence, stillness can resemble emptiness. You may even miss the intensity, the chaos, the adrenaline of survival. Jung warned that this nostalgia for pain is the final test. The psyche must learn that peace is not boredom, it is healing. He wrote, "The most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a calm not easily disturbed. In that calm you rediscover your natural rhythm, steady, deliberate, alive without drama. You begin to see that real intimacy doesn't require suffering, that love without chaos isn't dull, but divine. The narcissist taught you their language through cruelty. Now your task is to unlearn it through consciousness. You no longer decode manipulation to survive. You interpret it to understand yourself. You learn to build boundaries not from fear, but from wisdom. You find value not in being needed, but in being whole. You speak softly, move calmly, and know that no one can own your peace." As Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And when you do, the narcissist's language loses meaning, because it can only function in the absence of self. You've reclaimed your psychological territory. You've remembered that silence isn't punishment, it's power." Jung observed that true liberation does not come from defeating manipulation, but from outgrowing it entirely. You stop trying to prove yourself right or them wrong. You stop needing to expose their deceit or win the invisible war. You understand that the battlefield was always psychological and that victory is withdrawal. When you cease engaging with their drama, you interrupt what Jung called the projection loop. The narcissist loses their reflection, the emotional mirror they depended on to confirm their identity. Without that mirror, they fall into what Jung described as identity collapse. Their carefully constructed persona begins to crumble, revealing the hollow structure beneath. And while this may look like chaos, it is not your chaos to manage. It is the unraveling of the mask that once ruled you. You, meanwhile, enter what Jung referred to as the individuation ascent, a rising from reactive consciousness into creative sovereignty. For the first time, you begin to design your emotional world consciously. The silence that once felt punishing becomes sanctuary. The solitude that once felt lonely becomes sacred. He wrote, "We are not what happened to us, but what we choose to become." The empath's power lies not in understanding the narcissist's shadow, but in illuminating their own. Each realization that once felt painful becomes revelation. I no longer need to fix anyone to feel worthy. I no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. I no longer confuse suffering with love. This is what Jung called the return of energy to the self, the reintegration of psychic power that was once scattered through people-pleasing, overgiving, and self-sacrifice. You stop leaking energy into the emotional vacuums of others. You begin to generate your own light. Yet even in this freedom, Jung noted, there remains one final temptation: the desire to teach the narcissist what you've learned. The mind whispers, "Now that I understand, maybe I can help them awaken too." But Jung warned that this is the ego's disguise for old attachment. You cannot awaken someone who is committed to unconsciousness. Your clarity threatens their illusion. Your growth exposes their stagnation. The only teaching possible is silence. He called this the wisdom of withdrawal, the understanding that truth does not require explanation. When you embody awareness, those who can see will recognize it. Those who cannot will interpret it as arrogance. Both are projections, and neither should disturb your peace. As you evolve, you may notice that your entire energetic signature begins to shift. You attract fewer crises and more clarity. Conversations simplify. Relationships either deepen into honesty or dissolve quietly. You start to prefer depth over drama, meaning over noise. This change, Jung said, signals the emergence of psychological immunity, a nervous system attuned to authenticity rather than chaos. This stage can be disorienting because calmness once signified danger. When your life becomes quiet, the old self panics. Something must be wrong. But you begin to realize that peace is not the absence of life. It is the presence of consciousness. Jung compared this to what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposites in harmony until a new state emerges. You learn to balance empathy with boundaries, understanding with distance, compassion with discernment. You stop needing to choose between love and self-respect because true love includes both. He wrote, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the moral problem. To accept yourself, you must also accept the parts that were drawn to pain, the patterns that tolerated chaos, the illusions that believed you could heal what refused to change. This acceptance is not self-blame, it is self-integration. Through this integration, you begin to practice what Jung called active imagination, consciously dialoguing with your own psyche. When you feel the urge to fix, you ask, what part of me still seeks validation through saving others? When you feel the pull toward chaos, you ask, what part of me mistakes intensity for love? In answering, you reclaim fragments of your soul once lost in survival. This self-inquiry transforms how you relate to others. You no longer chase what drains you. You no longer apologize for protecting your peace. You no longer explain boundaries as if they were crimes. Jung emphasized that individuation is not isolation. It is relationship from wholeness rather than from need. You begin to connect not because you are incomplete, but because you wish to share your completeness. From this wholeness arises what I call the authenticity ripple, the subtle influence of consciousness on the collective. When one person becomes immune to manipulation, everyone around them begins to shift. They feel the absence of emotional games and adjust unconsciously. Children raised around such clarity learn that love does not require self-erasure. Friends start mirroring your calm. Even your silence becomes instruction. Jung believed that transformation in one's psyche reverberates through the collective unconscious. What is not made conscious, he said, comes to us as fate. When you break the pattern, you are not merely healing yourself. You are changing the trajectory of human relationship itself. Still, this clarity can feel isolating. When you stop speaking the old emotional language, those who still live within it may no longer understand you. They may accuse you of being distant, cold, or arrogant. But this is simply the projection of those who mistake peace for indifference. Jung described this as the loneliness of consciousness, the silence that accompanies evolution. It is the cost of seeing clearly in a world addicted to illusion. He encouraged patience during this phase. The emptiness that follows detachment is not a void to be filled, but a space being prepared for authenticity. Soon, others who speak the language of truth begin to appear. People who communicate through presence rather than performance, who understand that stillness can be intimacy, that honesty can be tenderness. This is what Jung called conscious companionship. Relationships formed not through projection, but through mutual awareness. They are not perfect, but they are real. They do not seek to control, they seek to understand. In such spaces, love becomes what Jung described as the union of opposites, strength and softness, individuality and connection, freedom and trust. By this point, the narcissist's memory fades from significance. You realize they were never the villain in a personal story. They were the archetype that awakened your evolution. Their cruelty became initiation. Their manipulation became curriculum. Without meaning to, they forced you into self-discovery. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Your suffering, then, was not meaningless. It was metamorphosis. You were being refined, not ruined. Each betrayal was a revelation in disguise. Each lie was an invitation to see. Each collapse was a return to truth. The empath's greatest victory, Jung believed, is to look upon the past without hatred, to see the abuser as the mirror that revealed the unfinished work of the soul. He called this transmutation, the alchemy that transforms poison into medicine. The same sensitivity that once enslaved you now becomes your superpower. You can sense manipulation before it forms, compassion before it's asked for, truth before it's spoken. Yet unlike before, you no longer need to fix or explain, you simply know. At this stage, you are fluent in a new language. Not the narcissist's code of control, but the language of clarity. It has no words for dominance or submission, no grammar of guilt or shame. Its syntax is silence, its vocabulary, authenticity. This fluency manifests as energy. You walk into rooms differently. You listen differently. You respond differently. Where others project chaos, you remain still. Where others demand validation, you offer presence. Jung would say that you have achieved the psychological condition of impermeability, not hardness but harmony. Nothing manipulative can attach to you because there is no longer a wound for it to enter. From this place, you finally understand what he meant when he wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." You are no longer translating someone else's madness. You are speaking your own soul's truth. You have become, in Jung's words, the bridge between the conscious and unconscious worlds, not by force, but by presence. And this presence, this calm awareness, is the end of the narcissist's power and the beginning of yours. Jung believed that the highest state a human being can achieve is what he called conscious sovereignty, the capacity to live with deep feeling, yet without psychological dependence on any external validation. It is a paradoxical freedom, complete sensitivity united with complete stability. The empath who reaches this state is no longer reactive, because nothing external defines their internal world. This, Jung said, is the real awakening. When the individual ceases to interpret other people's behavior as commentary on their worth, you begin to perceive every interaction as information rather than injury. Criticism becomes data. Rejection becomes direction. Silence becomes space. And from this clarity arises a profound compassion that is no longer sentimental but conscious. He wrote, "Only the wounded physician heals. Through suffering, you have acquired the empathy that understands pain without absorbing it. You can stand before another's darkness and see it without judgment, because you have faced your own. This is not detachment, but depth, the grounded stillness that sees all without being overwhelmed by any of it." Jung described this as the birth of the self, not the personality or the ego, but the integrated totality of who you truly are. It is the part of you that existed before manipulation, before trauma, before fear. The narcissist's chaos served only to burn away the illusions that kept you from it. In their destruction, you discovered creation. In their deceit, you discovered discernment. He warned, however, that enlightenment carries responsibility. To know the language of the unconscious is to hold a power that must be guided by humility. The moment you believe yourself beyond shadow, he wrote, you are possessed by it again. Awareness must remain fluid, never dogmatic. The sovereign empath does not preach awakening. They embody it quietly. From this quietness radiates a new kind of influence, not control, but coherence. Those who meet you may not understand why they feel calmer, clearer, or more honest in your presence. It is because you are no longer projecting or absorbing. You have become what Jung called a vessel of the self, transparent enough for consciousness to flow through. Your relationships shift accordingly. You no longer negotiate for love. You attract those who meet you in mutual awareness and naturally repel those who require an unconscious dance. This sorting happens effortlessly. Jung compared it to magnetism. Like frequencies resonate, dissonant ones fade. There is no drama, only distance. You begin to notice that truth itself protects you. Lies cannot survive in your energy field because you no longer provide the emotional fuel that sustains them. Manipulation requires reaction. When reaction ends, the manipulation dies of starvation. This is the secret of psychological invulnerability. Not that nothing can wound you, but that falsehood finds no purchase in your clarity. Jung called this the still point in the turning world, the center that does not move even as life continues its chaos around it. From this point, You can engage with others fully without losing equilibrium. You can witness suffering without drowning in empathy, face conflict without being consumed by anger, and experience love without attachment to outcome. This maturity brings peace that feels almost supernatural compared to the volatility of the past. But Jung insisted it is the natural human condition once consciousness integrates its opposites. What once seemed miraculous, serenity amid storms, is simply the psyche functioning as it was designed to.
He likened this state to alchemy's final stage, the rubedo, the reddening, where base material becomes gold. The empath's pain, once unbearable, has been transmuted into wisdom. The same depth of feeling that once attracted predators now attracts purpose. You no longer search for meaning, you live it.
The narcissist, meanwhile, fades into irrelevance. Their tactics cannot reach what they cannot comprehend. They continue seeking mirrors that reflect illusion, while you have become transparent to truth. The connection that once enslaved you becomes a closed chapter, a completed initiation. You feel no need for revenge, explanation, or closure, because awareness itself is closure. Jung wrote, "The greatest and most important problems are not solved, but outgrown. You have outgrown the need to fix, to fight, to be understood by those incapable of understanding. This outgrowing is not superiority, it is evolution. You are no longer on the same psychological frequency as those who depend on control. And yet your growth serves a greater purpose." Jung believed that every individual who reaches this level of integration contributes to the collective healing of humanity. Each sovereign empath becomes a stabilizing force in the collective unconscious, balancing the tides of projection that create conflict in the world. Your inner order becomes a microcosm of what civilization strives for: harmony between awareness and instinct, love and strength, shadow and light. He envisioned such individuals as the architects of the future psyche, people capable of relationship without domination, empathy without exploitation, individuality without isolation. They would carry within them the blueprint for a new kind of human connection, one where authenticity replaces control and consciousness replaces conditioning. You may not realize it, but by surviving and integrating what sought to destroy you, you have become part of this quiet revolution. The narcissist was the catalyst. Consciousness is the result. Your wounds have become windows through which the collective can see itself more clearly. When you look back, the story that once felt tragic now appears alchemical. Every manipulation was a teacher, every heartbreak, a furnace, every silence, an initiation into your own strength. The narcissist thought they were breaking you, but they were unknowingly shaping the container for your awakening. Jung concluded that the shadow, when made conscious, becomes light. You are living proof. The empathy that once enslaved you has become illumination. You no longer shine to be seen. You shine to see. Your awareness is not reaction, but radiance. In the end, the narcissist's greatest fear comes true. You see them, and more importantly, you see yourself. The mirror that once reflected confusion now reflects clarity. And in that reflection, you recognize the truth Jung spent his life describing. That consciousness is born through confrontation with darkness, and love, real love, begins with sovereignty. If you've reached this point of understanding, remember Jung's words. Your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. You are awake now. Not because you fought the darkness, but because you learned to read it. Not because you silenced it, but because you understood its language and chose not to speak it back. You are fluent in freedom, and that language once learned can never be forgotten. Thank you for carrying consciousness through the ruins. Your transformation is not merely personal, it is archetypal. Through your awakening, humanity remembers itself. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to breathe and remember that awareness grows when it's shared. Subscribe so you don't lose your way when the next reflection arrives. Leave a like. It helps this message reach others who need to hear it but don't yet know why. And share your thoughts below, because every comment here becomes a spark. One awakened mind helping another remember. Together, we move beyond the dark.